Hello, this video is going to go over a beaded keychain, and I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks to go along with it that you can carry on into the future with your beading as you learn. First, you want to take your rope or paracord and you're going to measure it out to the length that you want your keychain to be able to wrap around your wrist, and also leave some room for the keychain ring on the other end. Before you begin, you want to seal the ends of your rope so it doesn't fray as you're beading. So you can do this with hot glue, or you can get a doll to help you by using a lighter or over the stove. You also have your thread that you'll need. Pull it out about 3 wide times. Don't be shy with thread because I always like to have more than not enough. And of course you need your needle, and you also need your beads. So first we want to thread the needle, and we're going to put the thread right through there, and we're not going to tie it off at the needle. We're going to just give it a tail. So just pull out some and pull out enough to where you're not going to accidentally pull that needle off of that tail. So I have my thread and I have a tail at the other end here too. And the very far end is where I'm going to knot a lot. I'm going to make a knot over a knot over a knot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with fishing, but that's the kind of knot that I make. I just make a really, almost a tangled knot at the end because we don't want it to be able to go through the rope. The easiest way I find to do this is I cross over just like I would tie my shoe, and whenever I go under that loop, I go under like 3 or 4 times. I pull, and then I try to do another double knot or 2 on top of that in the same way. So just go under your loop 3 or 4 times and then pull, and try and get your knot as big as you can to where it won't go through the rope when you pull it through. And there may be times that you can't get that second knot over the first one, just like what happened with me here. You can try and undo it like what I'm doing right now, or you can just move on and make another knot on top of the first one. That does happen sometimes. So at this point, I think I have a pretty good knot. So I'm going to take my needle and pull it right through the middle of the rope. I also want to leave a little bit of room at that end of that rope, so we can connect the rope at the end. So we want to leave maybe a 1/2 inch. I even maybe left a little bit too much, but it worked out well. And then you're going to wrap around the rope and then go back through again. What we're doing here is basically trying to keep the thread from coming out of the rope, and we want it to be very sturdy. So we're going to keep wrapping around the rope and going through the rope as many times as we need to where it feels like it's got a lot of tension on it and it's very sturdy and it won't come out. You can wrap around 3 or 5 times and then go back through the rope again. Just stay going in the same direction. You just want to try not to change directions of the way you're wrapping around the rope. Check your thread again and make sure it's really sturdy before we move on to the beads. This is a 1/2 of a hank of beads, and all you have to do to get your beads off is to pull one string off gently at the top, and you'll have a string of beads. And I like to keep the beads on the string when we're using so many for a project like this at one time. It's really easy just to bead them straight off of that string. So I take my needle and I basically go down the string into the beads, and I try to get as many as I can. For this particular project, I start with 50 beads or so. So I'm counting here 50 beads out. And it's really easy. Like I said, I'm not sure what kind of materials you have today, but with the hank, it's really easy just to get it straight off of that string. And once you have about 50 beads on, you're going to pull it straight down all the way on the string until you get to your rope. And you should have that sturdy knot at the end of your rope there. So you're up next to the rope, and you're going to start basically turning the rope to wrap these 50 beads around it. Now you see we have a tail here from our knot, and we kind of just want to wrap over that tail, let it poke out, but just kind of keep it out the way if you can, but no need to really worry about it right now. What we do need to worry about is at the beginning of this process, it's the most difficult. Every time you start a beadwork project, the most difficult is going to be at the beginning, starting it off. So this part here is where you want to try and get your beads close together. You want to make sure they're placed correctly. So you have to put your needle down. Once you have your beads wrapped around, put that needle down and place your beads exactly how you want them to look. We don't want them all loose. We don't want a lot of space between your beads. You want your wraps of the beads pretty close together like I have here. I want to get them a little closer, and I might have to unravel just a little bit to make sure those other beads are pushed on, because we don't want them, you see how my beads went down the string right there? We don't want that to happen. We don't want a missing bead. We want to make sure we have all the beads on the rope and pushed together very nicely, but not too tight. So I have a little spacing left here, so I'm going to continue to pull them in a circular motion to get them further down to that knot that we made first. Always keep tension on the string with the beads on them, because you don't want those beads to fall down and you forget about one of the beads at the end. So we want to make sure they're all on the rope. Keep tension with one hand and maneuver the beads with the other hand to get them as nice as you can have them to look. It's important to remember that nobody's perfect and no one's beadwork is going to be perfect. So just try your best and you'll be able to see improvement as you do different projects in the future. So don't be in a rush this time around, this first wrap. We want to make sure that it's really well placed, because this is the start of our project. So if it starts off really rough, then it's going to go rough from here. So we want to try to make this first round as clean as we can get it. As you see, I'm just fiddling away, making sure that I don't have a lot of space between the beads, which I do have on the other side of that rope right now. And I finally get it to where I think it's good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my needle again, and look how nicely those rows are placed. I'm going to stab the needle and not my hand on the opposite side of the rope where those beads end. And I'm going to keep tension on the string. You see how I'm keeping tension with one hand, and pull the remainder of the string out with the other hand. Pull it through with the other hand. So I want to keep that tension. By keeping that tension, you're keeping your beads in place. All that hard work you just did, you want to keep it. Now watch at the very end as you're pulling through, and make sure your string and your beads are not getting wrapped up in a different row. We want it right at the end. And look how nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tack it by going through the very last bead. So it came out on one end, and we're going to go through the very last bead here, and we want to get back on track. And this is how we get back on track, by going through the very last bead. It's going to bring your string back into the position that we want it to be in order to keep going. So watch here again at the end, my tail end of my string got stuck through that little loop, and I find it's very easy to use your needle to get it out rather than your hand. So that's a little tip. After you go through that last bead, you're going to have to maneuver them just a tiny bit more and pull, and that way they're tacked down well and you can move on to the next 50 beads. All right, once you have those 50 beads on, you're going to do the same just like you had done a second ago, and you're going to wrap them around the rope very slowly. Just twist the rope around, and it's much easier to fix the beads kind of as you're wrapping them around the rope rather than doing it at the end like we did the first time. So let's just try and keep that in mind. It's also easier this time around because we already got that first set started and we have the pattern kind of going now. So if you see any spaces as you're wrapping, kind of just push those beads back down just like that, and make sure to keep tension on the string so none of those other beads are falling down and getting lost on the string. And once we have it wrapped around nicely, we want to check again, make sure everything is in line and how we want it to look, and we're going to pick back up our needle to get ready to tack them down. So just go through your rope, and you want to pull all the string through to avoid any tangles. Pull all that string through first, and then go through that last bead. And as you get more familiar with the process, you'll notice where it's better to pull through at. Always be aware of at the ending when you're pulling through that you don't have any lines overlapping the others, just like I had a second ago, so you can fix that as it's coming along rather than noticing it later. It gets harder to fix. We're going through the last bead again, and that's going to get you back on track. And remember to maneuver your beads at the end after you tack them off before you put some more beads on. Check them again. For this particular style, I am doing 150 teal beads to 50 accent color beads, which today I'm using peach. So this is going to be our third set of 50. So after this set, we'll get started with the next color. And once again, as you get to the end of pulling your thread through, you want to make sure that everything's in line. Watch where that thread is going. See right here, I noticed that my thread was under my line of beads, so I had to fix that. And that's going to save you a lot of aggravation if you wait till later to notice it. The next type of bead that I'm using is not on a hank, so I'm just grabbing them off of a small container top. It's easier if you have like a very small bowl. You can just kind of dig them out, and you want to use your finger to keep them on your needle as you're counting. So that's kind of a tip there. So using the same concept, we're going to pull those 50 beads through and tack them down before we're going back to the teal. And we're going to do 3 more sets of 50 for the teal and just continue this pattern until we get down the rope. If at any point during this process you run out of thread, you just want to secure the end by going through the rope and around it and making a knot and doing the same thing again. And then also getting some new thread. Start kind of where you fell off with the beads and make a good knot again, just like we did at the beginning. Go through the rope, around the rope until it's secure, and then you want to go through that last bead. That's going to get you back on track so you can start back up putting some beads on there. And you always want to look at what you're doing in your progress. Right here, what I did was measure it, making sure that it's the same on both ends. This is a good stopping point for me, and I want to visualize what it's going to look like. So I'm trying to put my thread through because this is like at the end of my thread at this point, and I need to bring it through the rope a few times, wrap it around, bring it through the rope a few times again. But I'm really running out of it here, so I need to also be able to make a knot. So basically with beadwork, you always want to try and hide the thread rather than cut it. And that's gonna make it less likely for it to come out too. So here I'm visualizing again what it's going to look like. And I'm going to measure out the loop that I'm going to make for my keychain. Now's a good time to put that little keychain ring into the loop. Which I forgot to do, but it was not a deal breaker. I was able to do it again afterward. So we need to secure this loop, and I'm going to do my best to try and secure it a little bit before I add some new thread. So basically I folded the loop over and I went through both ends of that rope. So at the end of my beadwork, I went through the rope to connect the end of the rope. So I went through both of them. I'm going around both of them and I'm going to go through them again and try to secure it at least a little bit with this last little bit of thread I have. Try not to let your thread get so short before you tie off and add a new one. After you go through the rope so many times, you're going to try and tie off that end of the thread. A tip is to use your needle to help. So you make a loop in the thread, you go through the loop, and then you stick your needle at the point that you want that knot to go really close to the beadwork. So put your needle through and pull the end of the thread so that you can maybe guide that knot as close to the beadwork as possible. So that is a good little tip I picked up. And you're once again going to be left with a little tail that you just want to kind of get out of the way. You don't want to cut it if you don't have to, so I just want to wrap it around a little bit, and I'm going to try and bead over it in a minute. So anyway, I'm going to make another knot to add some new thread, just like we did at the beginning. And it can be as ugly as possible as long as it is able to secure through that rope and it won't go through the rope. So I'm going to try it here. So I'm going to pull through and my knot goes through the rope, so I know that it's not secure enough. I'm going to make it bigger. So just do what you have to do to secure that thread to your rope. Now that it's secure, I'm going to try and wrap my thread around it and kind of make it lay down a little bit so it's not as obvious. So as we're doing that, we're also securing that loop. So I'm going through both of those ropes. I'm left with two little ends of thread that are sticking out, and once again, I'm not going to really worry about it too much. I'm just going to try, if I can, to wrap my thread over it. If I can, great. If I can't, I'm not going to worry about it. But I want to do this until that loop is secure. Go through both of the ropes, pull through, wrap around, pull through, and continue doing that. So now I'm also going to connect the other end of that keychain to both of those ends here, the end of my beadwork and the end of the loop. So I'm going to go through all three at this point. So I do snip off a long tail here. That was the one that I began with from the first place. I finally snipped that off. And I'm going to continue wrapping my thread around all of the connections at the end to get them very secure. I'm going to wrap around and around and put my needle through all three of them and just continue doing this till once again you can feel that it's very sturdy and it won't come apart. So that little piece that you left at the beginning before your beadwork, that's gonna poke out just a little bit. That's what mine's doing, and I'm just trying to maneuver it in between that loop. So just continue wrapping it around, pulling it through all three until it gets very sturdy. At this point, I finally remembered to put my keychain on, so that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to just kind of look at my progress and where I'm at here. So if you go through the rope enough times and around the rope enough times and through the thread enough times, you won't have to worry about it coming off. Just make a knot somewhere and go through and around again, and then you can finally cut that end off. A lot of old school bead workers will go through the rope or through their beads to hide the end of the string instead of cutting it. And I'll kind of show you a little bit of that at the end. But what we're going to do is take some kind of fabric to cover the area that we have all those knots in and the area that we're connecting the ropes. I'm using some leather today. You might have just some fabric or some vinyl. I've used that before as well. So you want the shape to cover the area you want it to cover, and you're going to have a little bit of thread just like we've been having at the beginning. You're going to have a little knot at the end, and you want to stab at the inside corner of that piece of fabric, because we want to hide that knot, so that knot's going to be on the inside. And we want to do the same for the other side, and that's going to meet those two top or two bottom corners, whichever one you're doing first. So stab the inside of one side, hide that knot, and stab the inside of the other side, and then you can pull it through and connect those two corners, just like so. You're going to continue in that motion, going through the outside of one side of the fabric, through the inside of both, and then coming out of the outside of the other side, and just bringing it around and around and around, going through. At some point you want to try and stab the rope, go through the ropes, that way it can be secure as well. We don't want that fabric going up and down that rope or the beadwork. And this is just a really simple sewing technique, so if anyone is around you at this point that you might need to ask for help, I'm sure they can explain. Here's the ending. I have 2 threads because it's just what I ended up having. You might just have one. So what I decided to do was tie them together. They're under my leather here. You want to try and make sure you end under, pull them out. And then I'm going to tuck them in. Like I explained earlier, instead of cutting them, that way they're less likely to come apart and unfray. So I'm going to tie them a bunch of times, and then I'm going to put, see how cute, I'm going to put the needle on because I want to try and thread them into that leather. So I got really short threads, so they kept coming off. So another trick is to put the needle in first. See, I'm cutting off because it was a little frayed, so you might have to cut your thread. Sometimes it's frayed on the end, which it makes it shorter, so it's harder. But I put my needle in first, and then I thread, and then I am able to push that needle through and get that thread to go inside of the rope and inside of the beadwork. So that's kind of how people do it, and then I cut it at the top, whereas a more old school person would probably go through the beads. And that's basically the end of the project, and so we've done it. Beaded keychain.